Hello and welcome to this Chiron Myth Circle, the wisest of all living things. I am so excited to share with you the story of Chiron in all of the parts that are often not shared when we do a quick meet Chiron, the wounded healer, because there's a lot more to him. And I think that the more that we understand those parts, the more useful it is when we're reading what does Chiron mean in our own charts. So yeah, it's the story of one of mythology's most quietly extraordinary beings. He's not a god, he's not a hero, he's not quite an animal, not quite a human, but in not quite being any of those things completely, he is still a teacher and a healer and a bridge between all of these different parts and all these different kinds of creatures and beings and ways of living. His name is Chiron, and he is not simply your wound, he is so much more. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. I am Gemma Kalala Barnard. I'm a mother of 4 boys and an astrologer. And I am so grateful, particularly at this point in the summer holidays, where we've all got lots of stuff going on with our kids. It's such an honor and a joy to be here sharing astrology with you. And there's something really really lovely about being able to be present with that for a little while, whilst my kids are elsewhere, and being able to focus on something else that brings me joy. So thank you for sharing this moment with me. I have Chiron in Gemini, which means that it's quite closely associated with my voice, with my ability to speak, to feel understood, to feel like my words have meaning and like people really see what it is that I'm trying to say. And that has definitely been a long story and a big healing process. And so it's really lovely to be here as a weaver of stories, telling this story of Chiron from there's something about pulling Greek mythology together where you're pulling from different places, from different stories, like when it's not a complete story of someone, because Chiron's story, he shows up in other people's stories more than having his own. And so being able to pull all of those pieces together and to allow them to speak through me, through my experiences and through my understanding of astrology, it's yeah, there's something really special about being able to share stories from my Chiron in Gemini, from my Chiron in Gemini, who often feels misunderstood, who often feels like, oh no, it's not quite right, and I need to get it perfect. And this is not a perfect story, and there are pieces that are like in there that I wasn't quite sure how to like pull them all into this story for you. But there is real beauty in this thread that we're following today, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you. So Chiron's life doesn't begin how you would want it to. He is the son of Philyra, an oceanid, a sea nymph, and of Kronos, and the father of time, the god of the cosmos at this point, the ancient Titan god who rules all things. And when Kronos sees Philyra, he thinks she's beautiful, and he transforms into this beautiful stallion to seduce her. I'm not quite sure how that worked, but the product of this union was Chiron, a centaur, but not quite a centaur because his parents weren't centaurs. He doesn't have that in his lineage. He's like part oceanid and part horse. And when his mother sees him, she is devastated. We don't know how much choice she had in his conception. Kronos is the ruler of the universe, and she may have not been interested at all, but felt like she had to. And so I think Greek mythology puts a lot of blame on women, on mothers particularly. But his father Kronos doesn't even acknowledge his birth. And Philyra, his mother, is so devastated that she cannot imagine her life raising this part horse child. So she asks to be turned into a linden tree by the gods, and they turn her into a linden tree. She chooses to cease to exist rather than raise him. And so this is a deep wound within Chiron's story that I think really speaks to how Chiron often shows up in our charts. He is often it's often a childhood wound, an early childhood wound that kind of shapes who we are, that shapes who we become. So whilst we often look to Chiron's wound right at the end of his life, after he's already lived a full and beautiful life, this is the wound that describes how Chiron often shows up in our charts. The wound of the abandoned child, the wound of the child who experienced something that shaped how they saw themselves and how they showed up in the world forever. And Chiron speaks much more to the way that we alchemize and the way that we heal these wounds than what actually happened. But in our charts, it can shine some light on what that might have looked like for us. But back to his story, he's left alone in the world with no parents. No one wants to take responsibility for him until he is found by Apollo, the god of the sun. And you might remember his twin sister Artemis, who we spoke about a couple of myth circles ago when we spoke about her as the goddess of the moon, of the hunt, of the wild, of the liminal in-between spaces. She chose a life beholden to no one. She chose never to have a relationship, never to have children, but to be the goddess of protection of women and children and of the wild spaces and of the spaces that are outside of the city, outside of civilized society. And because she saw the pain and the destruction that civilization can cause. And her brother, Apollo, god of the sun, he is the mirror of that, where she has the energy of the moon, of the reflected light that only shines at night. He is the god of the sun, the god of like full radiance, the god of the heart, of light and reason and form and music and poetry, medicine and prophecy, and maybe the most civilized of all of the Olympic gods. He is someone who is loved and celebrated, and he taught Chiron all of the ways of civilized society. He taught him how to show up, how to have conversations with people, how to be respected, how to share music and poetry. And so Chiron is raised by these two very different pieces, the sun and the moon, which speaks again to that idea that he is the bridge between things, that he is not quite fully of any one world, but has the gifts of both and is able to speak between the two. Yeah, the bridge. This is what I mean. So he is part animal, part human, part god. The centaurs in mythology, they are they are wild. They drink a lot, they fight a lot, they lose control of themselves. There's this one story where they go to a wedding and they decide that they will abduct the bride, of all things, just drunk and unruly. And Chiron is wise and gentle and civilized and immortal because his father was a god. And so he's quite separate from them, but still one of them. He's the bridge between instinct and wisdom, just like we were saying, between Apollo and Artemis, between the wild and the civilized, the mortal and the immortal. He can't fully live amongst humans because he is part horse. He is just ducking to get through doorways and struggling to sit on a seat or be in someone's home or move down pathways like a human would. He has this constant feeling of being out of place when he is amongst humans. And so he lives in a mountain cave in the spaces that Artemis would have taught him how to navigate. And caves are a really strong symbol. They are a liminal space between like the inside and the outside. They have this quality of darkness, of the unknown, of the things that happen in secret, of the things that happen in the dark. And it's also a kind of a womb. It's a space of creation where anything can emerge from a cave, where things are born and things are created before they are ready to be brought out into the light. And it's also a place of initiation. You enter as one thing and you emerge as another. You enter as a child, and in Chiron's cave, you leave as a hero. He was a teacher of all of these great heroes of Greek myth. Achilles, Jason of Jason and the Argonauts, Theseus, who slays a Minotaur, Asclepius, Pallas, who is the father of Achilles. So he would have known Chiron and brought his son Achilles to grow up in Chiron's cave, being taught all of his wisdom. And he was also one of the crew of the Argonautica from Jason and the Argonauts. And also Heracles, whose story we are going to move into and see how Chiron's journey intersects with that too. But he is a gardener of human potential, a midwife of greatness, a keeper of the cave where children enter and heroes emerge. And he had this great reputation and this very full and very like a powerful legacy without ever moving into the story of his wound that we remember him for now. And also, in many ways, this is like the story of the healing of that wound, where he was abandoned as a child and then adopted by Apollo. He now has that role in all of these other children's lives, in all of these other people's lives, where he gets to be their mentor and he gets to share his wisdom with them and give them the gifts that he has been given. And then the story of the wound. So this isn't even Chiron's story. Like, it's Chiron's story, but it's within a story that belongs to Heracles. Heracles has these 12 labors to complete. He is on his 4th labor. So for his 4th labor, he needs to kill a wild boar. But you will notice in this story there are no wild boars, because what's happened is Heracles has set off on his journey, but on the way he stopped to visit a friend. If he had not stopped to visit a friend, this could have been avoided. And there's a number of these choices along the way that are moments where this could have been avoided, but it isn't. And so he goes to visit his friend Pholus. Now, Phollos is a centaur, and he is a part of the centaur community, the center of that community. And we know this because he has a bottle of wine that belongs to all of the centaurs. And it's been gifted to them by Dionysus. And when Heracles comes to visit Phollos, I don't know if Heracles sees the wine and is like, let's have a glass, or if Phollos just wants to be a hospitable host, which seems very in his character, and so he opens it. The wine is opened, but without consent from the other centaurs, without a ritual, and the smell, the scent of this wine is dispersed all over the mountains, and the centaurs can smell it from miles off. They know that their wine has been opened, and they all come running to attack. And as they come running towards them, Heracles takes his arrows and he begins to shoot at these centaurs. He begins this epic battle, and in this battle much centaur blood is spilt, and Heracles has these arrows that are dipped in the blood of the Hydra, who he fought in an earlier labor on this journey. It's a creature where every time you chop off its head, a new one grows back. It is immortal and constantly regenerating itself. And so whenever you are struck with this poison, it brings instant death. And so these centaurs are falling, and amongst the centaurs that die in this battle, there are other centaurs who are forever changed by this moment. One of these centaurs actually goes on to kill Heracles much later in his life, long after any of this has happened. He still carries that rage and that desire for revenge. And he even kills Heracles with the blood of the Hydra, with his own blood that is spilled, mixed with this poison. Let's tell that story so it's not super confusing. He decides that to get Heracles back, he's going to abduct his wife. And when Heracles notices this, he shoots him with one of his arrows, and his blood is spilt, and he ultimately dies. But also he gives his cloak stained in his blood to Heracles' wife, and tells her that if she wraps it around Heracles, that it will make him faithful, that he will never be unfaithful if she wraps it around him. And so she goes to Heracles, and maybe she didn't even need to worry. Maybe this wasn't even necessary, but she wraps it around him, and that blood, the blood of the centaur poisoned with the blood of the Hydra, is what kills Heracles in the end. Another person who suffers terrible consequences in this battle is Phollos himself, Heracles' friend. And at the end of the battle, he picks up an arrow just to inspect it, just because he's curious. And he drops it, and it hits him in the foot, and he dies instantly. It's so many of the centaurs, the asteroids that we know as centaurs in the sky, have stories that intersect in this moment. And each of those stories explains a little bit about how we can interpret them in a chart, which I'd love to share another time. But let's talk about what happens to Chiron. Heracles shoots an arrow, and it passes through another centaur's shoulder, and it keeps going, and it hits Chiron in the knee. So Chiron is immortal. He can't die. So the arrow doesn't bring death. But also the wound is constantly regenerating. The wound is also immortal, with the blood of the Hydra, that poison within it. So Chiron has this wound that will never heal in his knee. And Heracles is devastated to have shot his mentor. That wasn't who he was aiming for. That was never his intention. It was another one of the accidents, of the avoidable things that led to this bloodbath. And so he does all that he can to try and heal his mentor. He collects herbs and he tries to make some kind of remedy that will heal his knee, but nothing works. Nothing works. And so he has this wound forever. But this is not his origin story. Chiron has lived this full life before this point. And so when we tell the story that he is the wounded healer, that he gains some knowledge through this wound, clearly he gains knowledge. Yeah, Chiron has had so much experience of healing, of teaching, of sharing wisdom before he gets to this point. And this wound that he cannot heal is like a way for him to experience what it is to live with chronic pain, to be the patient, to be the one who carries the wound. It's not something that he can show up and offer some kind of solution to for someone else. This is him understanding with like deep intimacy what it actually feels like to experience this wound, to experience this pain that he has to live with, that he has to live through, and that he has to find a way to make peace with. Because there is no escape from this. He is always going to carry this wound now. But this isn't the end of his story. And there is another character that we are going to remember from a previous myth circle when I did the myth of 2026 and we spoke about Uranus moving into Gemini. We spoke about Prometheus, the firebringer, the god who offered fire to the humans and who gave them this incredible technology, a way for them to become gods, a way for them to advance in technology, in their ability to live with cooked food and machines and heat, and to survive cold winters. And he offers them this fire, but it is also the fire that burns them. And not only burns them, but burns down the entire village, and that causes all kinds of pain and destruction. And his punishment for offering fire to the people is that he is chained to a rock. And an eagle is sent to him every single day to peck out his liver. And in a similar way, he is a god, he is immortal, so he cannot die. His liver grows back, he heals, but only for the eagle to come back the following day and peck out his liver again. And Chiron, may have been enduring his pain for many years, maybe even hundreds of years. But Prometheus has endured this pain for thousands of years. He has been here since the very first people walked the earth. And when Chiron sees him, I feel like there's this recognition here that pain is also a great teacher. And that whatever lessons there were to be learned from this eagle, from being chained to a rock, that Prometheus has learned them all the way through. That he has reached a point that his punishment is achieving nothing, and that what there is to learn, what there is to be found within that punishment has already been found, that great wisdom will already be within Prometheus. And he offers to sacrifice his own life in exchange for Prometheus's freedom. Now, when we talked about Prometheus before, we spoke about his brother Epimetheus as kind of a balance to him. But I think Chiron offers a really beautiful balance to Prometheus. He is wise, and he is gentle, and he is kind, and he is not going to he is going to give people the information that they need to be able to hold the fire without burning themselves, to be able to use it well, to use it to the very best of their ability, to give them that understanding first, so that they will know how to use it wisely. All of the things that we spoke about when we spoke about Uranus and Gemini, about needing this space for integration, for compassion, for understanding and wisdom. These are the gifts of Chiron that he brings, and he brings them to Prometheus. And Zeus agrees to this trade, and so Chiron sacrifices his life in exchange for Prometheus's freedom. So let's look at Chiron in your chart. Now, usually we look through the signs of the zodiac when we've looked at the nodes or the moon, or placements that travel much faster through our chart. But if you're here, I'm assuming that your Chiron is probably somewhere between Aries and Gemini. Aries, Gemini, Taurus. Those are the kinds of ages of people that are often in my world. So it moves quite slowly and shapes entire generations. It takes about 7 years to go through each sign. So we're going to look at Chiron in each of the houses of your chart. So have a check in your chart, see which house Chiron is in. And if Chiron is in your first house, this wound lives in your body, in your right to take up space, to be seen, to arrive fully in your own presence. You may have learned early that who you are is too much, or not enough, or simply wrong. And the teaching becomes an embodied authority that can't be faked. You know what it is to inhabit yourself against the odds, and you can show others the way home to their true self. If Chiron is in your second house, your wound lives in your worth, in the quiet, persistent sense that you must earn the right to have, to rest, to receive, that abundance is for other people, and that your body, your resources, your presence must be justified. Your teaching becomes an unshakable wisdom about value, not what things cost, but what they're worth, and who gets to decide. You have a third house, Chiron. This wound lives in your words. Perhaps you were told that your voice was wrong, that your thoughts were too scattered, that your way of speaking somehow was not quite right. Perhaps you were simply not heard. The teaching becomes the most precise and tender articulation. You've spent a lifetime learning how to say the things that needs to be said. And when you finally do, people feel understood in ways that they never expected. Fourth house Chiron is the wound that lives in belonging, in home, in family, in the foundational question of whether you were truly welcome at the root of things. You may have learned that home was not a safe place to be, that belonging had conditions. The teaching becomes the creation of a sanctuary for others. You know what it means to need a place where you are simply held, and so you build it. Fifth house Chiron, this wound lives in joy, in creativity and play, in being seen doing something that matters to you. Perhaps your creative self was shut down, laughed at, told it wasn't serious enough, and your teaching becomes the gift of permission. You become the one who says to others, your joy is sacred, your creativity is not frivolous, and you are allowed to delight in being alive. Sixth house Chiron, this wound lives in the body's rhythms, in health, in daily life, in the negotiation between what we can do and what we need. And you may have learned that your worth was measured in your usefulness, that rest was an indulgence, that the teaching becomes a holistic, lived understanding of what it means to truly care for a human being. You offer this to others with the authority of someone who has had to learn it the hard way. 7th house Chiron. This wound lives in relationships, in the places where we are most clearly seen and most painfully misread. You may have learned that love comes with conditions, or that being known means being hurt. And the teaching becomes a hard-won wisdom about what true relating looks like. Not perfect or painless, but honest and real, and capable of holding the full complexity of another person. 8th house Chiron. This wound lives in the deep waters, in loss, in transformation, in the experiences too large and too dark to speak about easily, in intimacy, in power, in the places where we have had to face what we would rather not. And the teaching becomes a capacity to sit with others in the dark. You do not flinch. You've already been there, and you know that transformation is possible, even here, especially here. 9th house Chiron. This wound lives in the longing to belong to a story larger than yourself, and the grief when that story fails you or falls away. You may have experienced a collapse of meaning, a faith lost, a worldview shattered, the particular loneliness of not knowing what you believe anymore. The teaching becomes a philosophy for living that was forged in the fire of genuine questioning. You do not offer easy answers. You offer something rarer, a willingness to sit inside the question. A 10th house Chiron. This wound lives in visibility, in being known, in legacy, in the complicated territory of ambition and recognition, whether you're allowed to be seen as someone who matters. Perhaps your achievements went unacknowledged. Perhaps you learned that success came at a cost that you couldn't name. The teaching becomes a vocation that truly serves, not performance, but a visible, purposeful life that says to others, you are allowed to be known for who you truly are. 11th house Chiron. This wound lives in belonging, not in the home or family, but in community, finding your people and being claimed by them. You may have always felt slightly outside the circle, close enough to see the warmth, but not quite invited in. When teaching becomes the gathering of kin, you create the communities that you needed, but that you couldn't find. And then finally, the 12th house Chiron. This wound lives in the places beyond language, where the self meets something larger than itself. This wound is often the hardest to name because it lives beneath naming. It may show up as a sense of unreality, of grief with no source, of longing for something you cannot quite describe. The teaching becomes a bridge to the sacred. You move between worlds with a quiet fluency that others find mysterious, and you carry medicine for the parts of people that no one else can reach. So let's talk about Chiron in Aries. So Chiron was in Aries from 1968 to 1977, and then again in 2018 to 2027, with a little gap right now where we are in Taurus, between, I think it was between June the 19th. Between June the 19th and September 17th, we're in Taurus. And then it's going to shift back into Aries for a little bit, and it'll be back in April next year, back in Taurus, and will have completed its journey through Aries completely. But this generation, people who were born with Chiron in Aries, it carries a wound around identity itself. And the Aries wound asks, am I wrong for being who I am? And the Aries gift is the capacity to affirm the identities of others, to hold space for someone to become fully themselves, and to say, you're allowed to be here exactly as you are. This generation has been doing that work for decades. And now Chiron is completing that journey. And we're stepping into Taurus. So, I need to move this out of the way. Chiron in Taurus, 1977 to 1983. And then now we're just beginning this journey in 2026 through till 2033. The Taurus wound runs through the body. Worth, pleasure, and earth. It says, I'm not beautiful enough. I don't have enough. My body is a problem to be solved, and I must earn the right to rest, to eat, to take up space, to feel good. It can also live in finances and the material world, in a complicated relationship with feeling undeserving of abundance, or clutching it out of scarcity rather than enjoying it. And the gift is the capacity to look someone in the eyes who is torturing themselves about their body and say with absolute authority, you were never the problem. It's a relationship with pleasure and the earth, with beauty, with rest that has been earned through years of not having it. And it carries a depth that those who came to it too easily simply don't possess. And so this is the energy that we're moving into now. And so being aware of that can help us to catch ourselves when we are demonizing our body, where we are feeling like we don't have the right to take up space, to be ourselves, to be exactly how and who we are in our own bodies, and to experience financial abundance, to experience comfort, recognizing that these things are available to us in some way or another, and not denying ourselves those things. And the Chiron return. So Chiron takes about 50 years to complete its orbit. So at about 50, we experience a Chiron return, where Chiron's right back at the same point that it was when we were born, hitting itself in our charts. So when we are looking at Chiron and thinking that it represents a wound, it can feel a little bit scary to look at our charts and be like, oh no, that wound is going to be reopened and I'm going to have to re-experience that. But I think that one of the things that we are learning through this story is that Chiron actually brings wisdom, integration, completion, healing. And so when Chiron comes back round to that wound, it can mean that people find their truest vocation in the years surrounding their Chiron return. The thing that they were always being prepared for comes clear. The suffering that felt meaningless begins to reveal its purpose. And sometimes the most profound wisdom can only be born inside lived experience. And lived experience takes time. I know so many people who came alive at 50 or in that second half of life just found a new vibrance, found a new way of being, found that they didn't need to accommodate everyone else all of the time, that they were able to take up space and be the fullest version of themselves. And it's obviously for women, it's going to coincide with some point in their menopause journey as well, and so that will be a part of it too. And there will be there's a lot of rites of passage through astrology, but also through life, that happen through those like 40s and 50s years in our lives, and the Chiron return is one of them. And that, I think, brings us a new richness, a new wisdom, a new way of understanding ourselves and our place in this world. So I want to offer you these journal prompts or gentle reflections. Feel free to take a screenshot or write them down somewhere, or pause this and do some journaling to ask, what is your Chiron story? Why are you allowing your story to be defined by a wound? And how can you cultivate that deeper Chiron wisdom? And if you would like to go deeper with this work, if you'd like me to take a look at your chart and talk about your Chiron story, I'm offering a Chiron themed a soul spark reading, which is my 15-minute pre-recorded chart reading. So if you would like to go deeper with this work, this would be a really easy way to work with me. But if you'd like to do something a bit more, I've created this class called Persephone's Path. And it is an introduction to astrology. So if you don't know how to read your chart yet, we will begin at the beginning. But also, I think it is about adding depth to the way that we read charts. Sometimes with astrology, it's really easy to get all stuck up in our head thinking about the numbers and the angles and how many degrees and what aspects is everything making, when actually it's a story and conversations that are being expressed through our chart. And so I want to help you to be able to walk through a chart and to be able to know how it feels to be in the energy of Gemini. Like, what does that landscape look like? What does it taste like? What can you hear there? And how is that going to shape like a particular planet or a particular personality that we'll get to know? What will they look like in that space? And how is that going to play out in these different areas of your life? And I think having this this felt and imagined and storied approach to understanding astrology really helps us to get out of our heads and into a space where we can understand it on a deeper level. That space of story, and that speaks in symbols, and that speaks to a deeper level of ourselves, speaks into our subconscious, into our bodies. And so I'm really excited to share this with you. I have just decided that I am going to offer a soul spark reading to anyone to the first 10 people who sign up for this. So if you are on the fence and would like to have a soul spark reading as well, I hope that that helps you to make a decision to join us for Persephone's Path. Our first call is on the 7th of August, so I'm going to close doors then as well. So if you're watching this later, then hopefully there'll be another round in the future, and I will reshare this with you. But yeah, if you get in before the 7th of August, you get that soul spark reading, and this chance to walk Persephone's path, to understand the zodiac in a new way, to understand your chart in a new way. So if that is interesting to you, I will put a link to the landing page so you can have all the details. And yeah, I hope that you'll join me. Thank you so much for being here with all of your wounds and wisdom. And I am going to stop the recording now and make space for questions.